All right, so welcome to our first Crystal Visions class for 2021. And today we're going to cover high altitude crystals, why they're important, how they come into one's collection, what to be on the lookout for, the meanings of some of the stones, and kind of what distinguishes them from other stones you might get. So let's start with the growth conditions for high altitude crystals. Um, in high altitude crystals are usually found in one of two formations. One is inside of what's called pegmatites, and pegmatites are igneous compositions of rock, igneous meaning they were formed under heat and pressure during a melting process. And the other way you can find them is through, you can find high altitude crystals is through sedimentary rock. Um, and sedimentary rock is the deposits that are then pressed together over time of various different types of rock that then become one sort of composite stone. And a sedimentary rock might be found in a high altitude place because every mountain on Earth was once at the bottom an ocean bed or a plains area that got pushed up to form the mountain by volcanic activity or by the movement of the plates of the Earth. The igneous formations are found because mountains often have a lot of volcanic activity going on in them. And so at the heart of the mountain, there's usually a fiery kind of hot core that even if the mountain isn't volcanic like Mount Shasta is, even if the mountain is a pretty calm mountain, there's still underground these pegmatites that form due to the magma, the heat and pressure. So now we're going to talk about how they form. The pegmatites form when a bunch of different minerals that are all in like a hot primordial stew of magma start to cool. And as those minerals cool, there are deposits of water, and the water that's inside of a mountain that mixes with the magma isn't evaporated or absorbed by the magma. Obviously, the flaming hot liquid molten stone doesn't really take a lot of water into its matrix, and there's nowhere for the water to evaporate to. So the water starts to condense into like a droplet or a bubble inside of this magma that's hot liquid rock. And as that magma cools, the minerals that are not infused into the pegmatite go into the water. So now you've got this mineral rich, really like soupy mineral rich water. This mineral rich water eventually forces itself because of combustion to the surface of the pegmatite and cools rapidly. And that is how we get the crystal in the matrix. So when there's like a ruby or a beautiful piece of aquamarine or a beautiful piece of tourmaline jutting up and out of what otherwise looks like, kind of a muddy, mix, that is because the water inside the stone that was laced with the minerals burst forth and immediately cooled upon hitting the air or the water or, the cooled rock above it. Which is why many high altitude crystals form in what look like a hexagonal shape or a rounded shape, and they're in long kind of I am not here right now. They're in long kind of tabular formations. So they look like a long column. So some of the stones that come into that are aquamarine, tourmaline, corundum, form in that way, rutile, basalt, um, which is more volcanic than liquid, but nevertheless, the basalt is often more like the matrix of that you'd find something else in than the feature stone, but still, all of these different stones have these long shards. They form in like a wand shape. Selenite also does this. So when we're talking about high altitude stones that are formed inside of these mountains at this like high heat and pressure, we're talking about these like amazing, very rare, they're not like huge mines. It's unlike subterranean things that are like citrine or amethyst, or there is like low elevation quartz versus high elevation quartz. But these low elevation stones generally form in different shapes, whereas the high elevation stones tend to form in more that protrusion shape, not universally, but in many cases. Now, the second way that we can find a stone on top of a high altitude mountain, and when I say high altitude, I'm talking about basically anything above 15,000 feet. I know, really above 10,000 feet is considered high altitude, but what we're really going to be talking about today are things that are found between 15 and 20,000 feet above sea level, very high elevation stones. So the sedimentary stones that go into that, up on that find themselves up on top of a mountain are often heavily laden with fossils. So where we're going to start our little journey today is with a fossil that came from 17,000 feet in the Himalayas. It is the fossilized inner ear of a whale. This fossilized inner ear of a whale was found in Pakistan at 17,000 feet. And so it's humbling in a way to think about how at once upon a time, a whale lived and died, and its body fell to the bottom of the ocean and decomposed, and this little inner ear bone stayed intact and became part of the sea floor. And then heat, time, volcanic activity, pressure, and the movement of the tectonic plates of this planet pushed it so that it was at 17,000 feet in the Himalayas. This is a very powerful little fossil, by the way. When I got this fossil, I put it in my bed with my husband and I, put it under my pillow, and then I put on 10 hours of whale song every night before we went to bed. So there's a range that actually goes from Pakistan through India and then into the proper Himalayas. So it's in that range. This one probably was from Pakistan. Some of the other ones I have are from more like India and China. So so I put this in the bed and I put on 10 hours of whale song every night for like a month. And Albert was like, what are we doing? I was like, we are going to commune with the spirit of the whale. And you can see it really is interesting because the inner ear of a whale resembles a human ear, doesn't it? Like really resembles it. Like it's the same exact almost size as my ear. Now this is just the inner drum of the whale ear. But this would be a fossil. It was found within a sedimentary layer in this Himalayan range. Let's see, I don't think I have any other fossils, but I want to talk now about high altitude quartz. Now, in order for me to talk about the rest of the minerals that are not sedimentary, so sedimentary material is very easy to mine. You basically use water, brushes, and you just, kind of like wash away the dirt and the little grains and the little gravel and everything until you come to something that's solid, like rock, stone and crystal within it. But for the rest of these, especially the pegmatites, often in order to access pegmatites, there needs to be some form of a mining operation, meaning that there will be drilling or there will be explosives used or there will be hand hammering in order to chip away the layers of the rock that are there so that you can get to the bunches of stones that are beneath. And in the majority of the crystal trade in the world, especially at lower elevations, explosives are used. And the explosives that are used are like high grade explosives. Usually that will open a big blast zone and create then a kind of a cave so that miners can go in and access and drill the rest of the tunnels. So after an explosion, then they go in with the big drills. They use like, those things, like that, these machines. They drill out tunnels and then they work their way through the tunnels and they work in the walls of the tunnels. At high altitude, drills don't work. Explosives, you can't even get to a lot of the high altitude mines, especially in Pakistan. You cannot get to them with a car, a truck, or big machines. So there's a difference in how high altitude mining is done because the miners have to go on horseback, on foot, or on donkey in order to get to their mining sites, which means they're going to be doing no big blasting. They do small scale blasting. They're not going to be able to lug in the big pneumatic drills and equipment. And they also can't actually bore that far into the mountain because many of these mountains are made of solid stone. So there's an interesting question around ethics of crystals and crystal mining, just that I wanted to make sure we address here. Sometimes you read articles about how crystal mining is bad for the planet. It's, a violation of nature. And then you read other things that say, no, it's not. The reality is, and you should make your own decision, most mining on the planet, 90% of the mining on the planet is not for the geological stones that we have in our crystal collections. 90% of the mining done on Earth is for things like oil, things like quartz and other crystals that are then ground down, and in diamonds and things that are ground down and used in commercial tool building, in watchmaking, and in other kind of corporate enterprises. So crystal collectors are not actually the ones who are out there topping mountains or hollowing them out. That's not actually the majority of that trade. But the people who are mining at high elevation are doing even less damage than the ones mining at lower elevation, simply because the tools that work on a grand scale at lower elevation do not work above 15,000 feet. There's not enough oxygen in the air to power certain types of engines. You cannot even drive at that level. Like, no vehicle would work. And also other things don't really work up there. So instead, you have gemological mining that is at more of a sustainable level. Furthermore, whereas at lower elevations, a lot of the mines are owned by big corporations that, have purchased the claim and are just digging out crystals. At high elevations, especially in Pakistan, the mines are owned by the villages at the base of each mountain, and the villagers in the base of each mountain, usually in every household in those villages, there will be at least one or two miners in that family. And those miners, all from those different villages, collectively go work. And the money that comes in from that mining operation is shared amongst the whole village. So the profits that come from high altitude mining are also different because they benefit the miners directly, as opposed to some of the profits that come from the mining at lower elevations, which benefit big corporate interests. This doesn't mean that you can never buy another amethyst or fluorite or low elevation crystal. It just means that if you're looking for ethically sourced stones, you're going to have more luck finding them amongst some of the high altitude varieties, because corporations are just not as interested in the high altitude mining operation. It's much harder, much less profit, and there's also a significant risk of mortality, especially if you're not from the area. Miners at high elevation who share in the profits of their work look out for each other. It tends to be more family based, and it tends to be something that's kept in the family as a trade for longer. So somebody who's like a child of a child of a gemological high altitude miner is more likely to go into that profession than somebody might just go off to school and become a doctor or become a lawyer or do something different. There's a pride in carrying that forward. The last thing about the high altitude mining versus low altitude mining is that the water is purer at the higher altitudes, of course, because it hasn't gathered as much sediment as water in lower altitudes. So when there's this higher altitude, purer water, it then means that the specimens are much clearer than the same stone found at low altitude. And I have a perfect example. So this is a piece of rhodochrosite that comes from a low altitude mine in Brazil. You can see it's a beautiful specimen. It's got nice layers and striations. It's a pretty pink color. There's a little bit of brown mixed in. Now this is a high altitude gem quality rhodochrosite from Peru. Okay, so now look at them next to each other. So you can see that the high altitude variety is clearer, like you can like see inside the stone. It looks impossibly pink. This looks like it was dyed, but this was not dyed. This was just came out of the earth this way. It's rough on one side, polished on the other. It also, just like this one, has the striations, but there's not as much clay in the matrix as this one. This one has a lot of clay in the matrix because it was mined at a low altitude spot. And so the matrix is just got more sediment in it. So rhodochrosite, by the way, is used for heart healing, for love, for forgiveness. It's really good for starting over after a failed relationship or after a time of conflict. Rhodochrosite is very good for attracting, let me just mute everybody, okay, is really good for attracting partnership. It's good for attracting beauty. It's known to be a stone that softens the heart. And in fact, I even read in one of the books by Judy Hall writes some really great crystal guides. She wrote that if somebody is averse to the color pink of rhodochrosite, and this has happened to me more than once, where I'll point someone to a piece of rhodochrosite and they're like, oh, I hate pink. That if you're aversive to that pink color of rhodochrosite, it means, she says, it means you've got heart healing that you need to do. So if anybody starts to feel like, oh, they can't love this gemmy pink color, it's worth thinking about, like, where might you be judging yourself for enjoying the beauty of this? And is it possible that you've had some, programming in your life that's made you feel like you couldn't access this kind of beauty? So the other thing that I use rhodochrosite for often is, if somebody is struggling with cancer, particularly breast cancer. I've helped a lot of women who are going through various different stages of breast cancer journeys, and I'll look for pieces of rhodochrosite to give them as gifts, to carry with them, because it is such a heart healing stone and soothing, calming, and opens you to receiving love. And sometimes when someone's on a cancer journey, they start to feel really alone because they're having a unique experience that others around them are not sharing. And so then they don't feel so as alone. And also that it's for, a lot of times when something like cancer happens to people, they start go looking for, like, what have I done to deserve this? Maybe I did something bad, and there's kind of like a self-punishment story that can come up. And so rhodochrosite helps you, if you're helping them through that, you can kind of say, look, you didn't cause this. This isn't your fault. This is just something that happened. And you give them a piece of rhodochrosite to help them stop looking for who's to blame. And in fact, rhodochrosite will help us stop looking for who's to blame in a lot of different situations where there's not really going to be a clear, clean, or satisfying answer to that question. So it helps us ultimately release blame, shame, and judgment so that we're free to love as purely as possible. So that's number one on our list. Now, a stone that occurs really in big quantities at both high and low altitude and all over the world is quartz, your friend and mine. I actually wore this necklace today, which is Tibetan quartz. This is a quartz from Tibet. It's not occluded. It's called Satyaloka azeztulite. It's not, that's a brand name. That's not real. It's basically a high quality form of quartz, very clean and clear. I have another specimen of it here. Very clear quartz. And it comes from Tibet and India, and from high elevation, again, 17,000 feet or above. And the people were mining high altitude Himalayan quartz for a really long time before the author, Robert Simmons of the Big Book of Crystals, came along. And Robert Simmons has a body of work where he has, he says he's channeled these Azez people who are extraterrestrials. This isn't just, I'm just going to tell you the story. He says he has channeled extraterrestrials and that they are the Azez people, and that they've told him that specific deposits of quartz on Earth are there because they placed them there. So when you get a piece of, so what Robert Simmons did was he took quartz. I'm just gonna, like, this, sorry if I sound like an old sea hag, but he took basically stones that are like quartz, and then other stones that are sedimentary, stones that mostly are inexpensive, like anhydrite. He gave them designer names. He patented those designer names, and then he sells those stones for a lot more than what other miners are selling those stones for from the same places. So if you ever see like Himalayan quartz is a very usually high grade, beautiful, clear quartz that has sometimes got black or gold occlusions in it. I've got tons of it in my house. I keep it everywhere. It's not expensive. It's, just really soothing, beautiful quartz. And then the really high quality versions are perfectly clear. by labeling it in, you know, azeztulite, Satyaloka azeztulite, and other stones that he gave brand names to. He basically created a story around that. And that story is what is commanding the higher price for those stones, not necessarily their quality. So I'm not saying that to put the guy down. I think his book is great. He's got fantastic information. And I always buy something from his booth when I go to the Tucson Gem Show. We're in, you know, I feel good about his work. But I also know when, you know, it's not necessarily anything that is so distinct in actual gemological quality from a lower priced specimen. And that's what I'm trying to bring up. Now, when you get this kind of a high elevation quartz, what might be some of the qualities that come along with it that differentiate it from quartz found at a low elevation? Well, number one is the higher water content often yields the clearer quality of stone. The higher water content and purer water content make the stone cleaner and clearer. But the occlusions are really interesting. And let me grab I left this one piece that's really perfect over here. The occlusions of these stones are quite beautiful and quite striking. And I've got this piece that is a Tibetan quartz. It's double terminated. Often Tibetan quartzes are double terminated, meaning there's a point on both ends rather than just on one end. They grow in two directions. The occlusions within are just so, you know, black and white and sometimes are gold. And they're very striking. But do you see how the light, like when I turn it like this, how the light really comes into it? And there's like that internal faceting where there almost looks like a rainbow here in this point. That is that's how you know it's got high water content. High water content quartz has that like inner shimmer to it. It's either really clear or it's got really interesting inner facets that give it like a sort of an otherworldly shimmer to it. So visually speaking, sometimes their high altitude quartz is a little sparklier than low altitude quartz. But there is also, you know, a huge body of study around the fact that like, you know, monastic communities in Tibet, Nepal, and India have often gravitated toward high altitude areas for their silent retreats and their private retreats and their meditation retreats. That's also why they sometimes will put monasteries up much higher than, you know, where people are living for their everyday lives. And this isn't hierarchical. It's because there's a belief that as you go to the higher elevation and your body is challenged to gain more oxygen, your body gains vigor, strength, high life force. You are there being inspirited by the mountain deities and the spirits of the mountain. You have easier meditation. You know, and all of this kind of body of lore comes into play when we're looking at high altitude quartz, because then it's thought, well, all quartz aids in meditation, but a Tibetan quartz might be preferable to an Arkansas quartz for meditation because it comes from those high elevation places where those mystery traditions arise. So the mystery traditions of India and Tibet and meditation and things that go along with Buddhism, but also that go along with the pre-Buddhist shamanistic religions of those regions have a lot to do with why the high altitude quartz has a sort of special vibration. But that's not the only reason. There is something else. So wait, I'm so excited to show you this. I can't believe it. Okay. Do you see this crystal? Do you see this etching on this crystal from here top to bottom? This quartz, this is a high elevation quartz, 17, probably 20,000 feet, this one. This quartz was struck by lightning. That is a lightning strike. This is the path that the lightning took on the surface of this stone. And lightning strikes happen at high elevation onto the earth far more than they happen at low elevation, just because lightning strikes usually the highest thing in a vicinity. And because the mountains are up there where the weather is being created, in the Himalayas especially. So this piece has beautiful, beautiful etching on it. And a lightning struck quartz is said to have all the same characteristics of quartz that you might have. It's programmable, it's calming, it's meditative, it's empowering. You can ask it to help you with particular specific tasks and it will help you. But lightning struck quartz also brings with it the idea of being able to control weather or work with spirits of the weather, depending on your belief system. And it brings along with it the idea of like the same thing that a lightning strike implies, that there's some once in a lifetime quality to it, this energy that will bring about like sudden change or sudden prosperity or just like being struck by lightning. So when you have a lightning struck quartz from a high altitude region, you're bringing in all of those qualities of the high altitude quartz. And here, even on the side that isn't struck by lightning, you can see what I'm talking about. Let's see if I can get it to show it really good. That internal faceting that I was talking about that has just that unearthly light. Like, where's the light coming from? But it's just kind of coming all from within. It has that, even though the lightning strike is on the other side. So there is the sense with a lightning struck quartz that there's this like opportunistic energy, energy of opportunity that comes into it. And when we're working with quartz, like I mentioned before, it's programmable. You can ask a quartz crystal to help you with just about anything and it will help you. It's kind of like a battery. If you think about carrying a piece of quartz, and quartz, by the way, is the stone of the month for the temple in the month of January. It's like the stone that is the root of all these other stones. Lots and lots of different stones are, basically glorified versions of quartz. They have the same base matrix. So that is quartz. Now, other stones that are formed at high altitude, and the clarity being because the water is less sedimentary and it's just more pure. But other stones that occur at high altitude have very vivid color. And again, this is because of the purity of the deposits. So this next one that we're going to talk about, these are from Pakistan. And Pakistan and Afghanistan both have excellent lapis lazuli. This one is Pakistani lapis. So Pakistani lapis is usually a very deep blue color, and then it has little threads of gold and white through it. The Afghani lapis is also a deep blue color and doesn't have the threads of white. It has the threads only of the gold. So you can often tell the difference between Afghani and Pakistani lapis by looking at how deep is the blue, how much pyrite inclusion in there is there in the stone, and whether or not there's white or brownish other sediment in the stone. Lapis is found at high altitudes in Pakistan and across the Himalayas. And interestingly, when we say Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra that that I do in the temple every day, that mantra means behold the jewel in the lotus. But what a lot of people don't know is they sort of think, well, the jewel in lotus, and what does that mean? And what is this jewel they're talking about? And there's different mythologies about this. But what a lot of people don't know is that when we're doing this chant, Om Mani Padme Hum, the jewel in the lotus, there is actually a jewel, and it's lapis. Like it's a Buddhist tradition that the jewel that represents the jewel in the lotus is actually lapis lazuli. So can you imagine being, there, wandering in the mountains in the Himalayas at some point along the way and coming upon this amazing, beautiful, deep blue, sparkling stone and feeling like you had just been given a gift from the gods. And so lapis has a long tradition in the shamanic cultures that predate Buddhism. In China, in Tibet, it was used in China as medicine. It was ground up and made into a powder and used as and taken internally as medicine. We wouldn't do that now, but it was, done in the past. Um, never put lapis, don't put it in your mouth. You never take this internally. Um, it was also used as makeup by the ancient Egyptians. They would grind it into a powder, make a paste, and use it on their eyes as eyeshadow. It was used in preparations for royalty in the Middle Ages, believing that sometimes drinking or eating out of lapis would purify any disease of the, or any poisons in the food. So lapis is a stone of kind of regal, regality, of royalty, of healing, of leadership, of spirituality and spiritual accomplishment. And all of those qualities can really be traced back to the pre-Buddhist shamanic cultures that first encountered this, mostly at high elevations. And I think many of us are familiar with lapis. Another stone that forms that's very royal, that forms at high elevations, and I've only got these two here, but ruby is among them. So the stone is corundum. Corundum is the kind of technical name. But corundum is basically the matrix that creates both sapphire and ruby. And depending on the mineral content that's in the area will determine whether it goes more red or more blue. And I've actually seen sapphires that are gray and purple as well. And I also have a black one. So they can be all different colors, and they can be yellow as well. But the red and blue corundum that form as ruby and sapphire are the most common high altitude stones. And what's interesting about the mining, going back to the mining operations, rubies are really common in Pakistan as the high altitude stone. And I want you to think about this, like, in order to mine these and not damage them, because part of the value is in their shape and their size and, how long they can get without breaking. And that means how many slices you could get of the stone if you're making jewelry to make a cabochon. So the value of an intact piece of corundum that's a good color is very high. When you're doing mining at that level, everything has to be carried in or out on your own back or on the back of a donkey or on the back of a horse. So you don't have like big explosives, you don't have big machines. What they'll do is they'll take a small drill, they'll drill like 3 holes into a stone. And they'll only do this if other corundum have been spotted in the area. They won't just like go doing this to, damage the mountain. They just go looking for where there have been other ones found, and they will drill like 3 holes into a flat rock surface. And then they might use some small low grade explosives to basically blast the cap off of that little triangular shaped area that they've created. Now, when they do that dynamite, just to be clear, it usually penetrates the stone about this far. That's it. It's not going and digging a big tunnel. It's actually just blasting off the surface of the stone so that they can get in, and then they can use their tools. They can use brushes, picks, and other fine tools to get at the specimens that'll protrude from the clay matrix or from the stone matrix. And these two are sapphires that have come from two different places. One is a low grade sapphire. So this is like a low value sapphire. This is a $2 sapphire. You know, it's got a lot of pits. There's no sheen. There's no chatoyancy. That means like that shine that you sometimes see on the surface of a glowing stone. It's just kind of, you know, basic sapphire. Nothing wrong with it, just not fancy. This is a high altitude sapphire. So you can see it's got chatoyancy. Do you see that like mirror-like effect when I move it? That's chatoyancy. That means that there's a kind of a sheen within it. And that sheen is usually caused by feldspar. So this is a higher grade, obviously higher grade sapphire. This is more like a $6 sapphire. And it's deep, you know, a deeper blue, and at the same time has a little bit more of a silver to it. So whereas, you know, if you're working with crystals, it doesn't actually matter. Your $2 sapphire and your $6 sapphire are going to work just the same if what you're wanting to do is to carry something around to help you increase your confidence and your voice and your leadership. But if you want one that's got that little extra special kind of look to it, or if for you the visual aspect is important, or obviously if you're making jewelry, the visual aspect is very important, you're going to want higher grade, higher altitude sapphires mostly. And a lot of sapphires come, really good sapphires come from Burma, which has also got high altitude mountain ranges, and from India and from the Himalayas, and then a lot of rubies from Pakistan. And the Pakistani rubies are considered really high quality rubies because of they're very clear. Another stone that forms at high altitude. So sapphire is, you know, confidence, authority, but it's also very mystical. And corundum is used in a lot of different machines all over the world. So when they go and they dig out, you know, if they find a vein of corundum, but what if it's all like gray and doesn't have any like facets and doesn't have that visual beauty, that all that corundum gets used in like building machines, gets used for tumbling, sanding, other kinds of machines. Okay, so another stone, and it's interesting because as I'm going through it, I'm like, huh, lapis, sapphire, also this topaz that we're about to look at. This topaz comes from high elevation, and it looks similar to quartz. You know, it's clear. This is only one form of topaz. Topaz comes in a lot of different, there's blue and yellow and different colors. This is like a whitish, yellowish topaz. It's not a super high quality one. But topaz is also a stone of royalty, and it's a stone of command, and it brings like a fiery energy, a lot of courage and confidence, and a sense of self-possessedness. So a topaz, especially if you're wanting to offer services in the world, if you're wanting to do things for people, you know, like you know, create programs or teach or lead in any way, having a piece of topaz on your altar is a good idea. I have a couple pieces of topaz. I have this one here that's for this altar. I have one over there that's for another altar. And then I once upon a time bought like a handful of like 6 tiny topaz, and I sprinkled them in my dish where I keep my jewelry, so that at night when I take my jewelry off and I put it in that dish, it's charged with the topaz all night long before I put it back on in the morning. So topaz is for, confidence in your own authority. And this is another high altitude stone. And the clear topaz or the silver, the golden topaz is very common at high altitudes, but you get more colorful topaz below in the, lower altitudes. And a lot of these places, there are going to be gradients of stones, through at the high and the low altitudes. And a lot of the miners, the average mining season in the high altitude elevations is between like June and October. And then during the rest of the year, the miners work at lower elevation. Okay, so another stone that is very common, and often occurs with quartz or with other stones in high altitudes, is lepidolite or mica based stones. So this is a piece of muscovite. Muscovite is similar to lepidolite. It's similar. They're all mica. And so what is mica? Mica is like, it's like the phyllo dough of stones. It's like a light, flaky stone that has lots and lots of little thin layers, like a French pastry of a stone. And that's what causes it to have such a sparkle. Mica is what's used in all natural makeup. So when you buy like natural eyeshadow, it's often infused with mica, which gives the eyeshadow that little bit of sparkle. So this muscovite is a beautiful pink color, similar to lepidolite, which is a little more purpley. And I have a piece here. Anhydrite, which has a similar look, is also found at high elevation. But this is a lepidolite with a piece of amazonite. So it's actually an amazonite that was growing in a mica base. And then when they cut the nodules of the amazonite off of that base, a little of the mica stayed with it. So that's why I like this one. But see that shine? So that muscovite, mica, lepidolite kind of family of stones are the mirrors. They reflect energy back. So it's really helpful. Lepidolite is used for coping with depression and anxiety because it will reflect and protect you from interference from outside influences. Lepidolite is also has naturally occurring lithium in it, and that is very calming. Of course, it's not like taking lithium, but it's just the subtle energetic presence of that stone that really helps it to smooth things over. These are particularly good for coping with fears. And there's another high altitude stone. I don't have one right here. I think my piece is in my car, actually. Aquamarine also forms at high altitude, and muscovite and aquamarine have one thing in common, really one other thing in common, which is that they're both really good for travel. So if you have to travel or go somewhere and you need protection, carrying a piece of aquamarine or carrying a piece of muscovite will help. When it comes to things like anxiety and depression, lepidolite will help. And when it comes to things like needing to reflect back societal projections or protecting yourself, mica is very helpful. The other thing about mica, and I have a piece over here I'm going to get and show you something really cool. The other thing about mica is that having mica around will help you to be able to burn incense. Where is it? I had all these pieces of it right here. It will help you to burn incense without needing a charcoal. I don't know where I put this piece of it that I had. It was right over here. But anyway, since I can't find it, what you'll do is if you get a thin piece of mica, it's usually just one little thin sheet and very brittle. What you can do is you can put um, like a hot charcoal into like a burning pot, but instead of putting the plant material on the charcoal and releasing smoke, instead you'll lay the mica, like perch the mica just above the heat element, and then put the plant material on top of the mica. And what will happen is then the fragrance will be released from like your incense or your copal or your frankincense, but you won't have the smoke. So if you can get a thin slice of mica that's like, this big, like the size of I don't know, a playing card, you could put a charcoal in a little cauldron and perch that on top and put your plant material on top of the mica, and then it'll just release the fragrance. And I've tried it. I actually had this piece of mica. I wonder what I did with it. After we're done, I'm sure it'll show right up. But I've done this before and it really is really nice. The fragrance is more subtle than when you're burning the herbs, but it is really quite sublime, and it's very magical to be like, my incense is sitting on this stone, and it's so wonderful and ritualistic. So that's the kind of mica family. And then finally, or not finally, second to last, Amazonite. So I mentioned that before. Amazonite is one of the high altitude stones of the Himalayas, but it is also a high altitude stone of the United States. You can get Amazonite from the high altitude space in Colorado. So and there's places you can go in Colorado to do your own mining if you want to. So where they let you do just, low level gemological mining. And you can rent the tools or borrow the tools, and they'll kind of give you a little lesson about it. So Amazonite, this piece of Amazonite is from this smaller piece is the high altitude Amazonite. You can see it's got a really pale blue and almost like a lot of white mixed in with the blue all around the stone. Now, this piece of Amazonite is from Siberia. And it's from this one mine in Siberia, which is right near where they also mine Siberian jade. It's also near the Shungite mine, and it's also near the mine where they do the charoite. So it's very hard to get some of these stones, not Shungite, Shungite's everywhere, but it's very hard to get charoite, and it's very hard to get this Amazonite because for many years they shut these mines down. So I had this piece, I've had this piece for a long time. I get it from this Siberian family that goes to all of those mines, and they specialize in charoite, Amazonite, Shungite, jet, and Siberian jade. And you can see that the lower elevation one has a darker color, and that the white is not mixed in. The white is more in like rivulets, whereas the white on this one, it's still in some rivulets, but it's like there's like smaller veins, you might say. There's like one or two big veins. This has bigger stripes. And it's kind of hard to see in the video, but it's more striated. Whereas this one is not as striated. This is more like formed like a bubble, and this one was more formed like layers. So Amazonite is a stone used for healing, for heart healing, for courage, developing one's courage, for protection, for smoothing communication and finding your voice. It's good for healing various different like neuroses, like if you tend to kind of have thoughts that go around and around and around in your head, Amazonite can help quiet that noise. So another reason we like that stone. And then last but not least, this is from Peru. This is a Hawkeye black velvet tourmaline. So tourmalines grow at high elevation. They're usually really at high elevation, they're usually beautiful colors. In the Himalayas, your high elevation tourmaline. This is why like a single tourmaline that's perfect, that's like this big and this long, could be like $65,000, because there's only ever going to be the one of that stone. It's so specific and special. But in Peru, they have tourmaline at high elevation, but it's not as expensive. And you get black tourmaline at high elevation. And this is hawk's eye black velvet tourmaline. The reason it's called that is because you can see that it's black, but it's kind of got that silvery sheen to it. That's kind of makes it look like velvet. That's why it's called that. And whereas usually tourmaline, especially a lot of tourmaline comes from China, black tourmaline comes from China the best. And it's usually long, very shiny, jet black. This has kind of just more like a soft sheen to it. So this is a little bit distinct, whereas the ones that form at lower elevation in Asia are harder. These are softer. The ones that form in Asia are shinier. These are matte. But nonetheless, still a black tourmaline, and tourmalines like high elevation, and they often form in that same tabular, that kind of same long shape, long columnar shape. All right, so that is all the stones that I have from high elevation for today for us to go through. And black tourmaline is used for warding off negativity and blocking bad energy from coming near you. So in summary, if you are interested in ethical sourcing of your crystals, find out where they were mined. If they were mined in India, Pakistan, Nepal, Tibet, or in some parts of China, and ones that are in China are often labeled that they were mined. The ones that are mined in Tibet are often labeled that they were mined in China. But if you're looking for good ethical stones, look for some of these varieties mined in those places. Quartz, Amazonite, mica, muscovite, lepidolite, ruby, sapphire, topaz, tourmaline, lapis. You will find that there is a kind of an energetic essence to the smaller scale, community operated, community owned, family style mining that still is happening in not exactly like ancient traditional ways, but more like old school, modern traditional ways, rather than big corporate mining. And that there's also a quality of energy that comes from that high altitude that brings with it a certain type of quiet, of silence, of aid in meditation, a mental calming that I think is part of the reason why some of those traditions have flourished in those areas of the earth, because the environment and the landscape supports it. And I hope you enjoyed our first Crystal Visions class, and we will be back in a month with the next one. And I don't know what the topic is going to be yet. Do you have a, no, you don't. It's still the cat. Literally, Megan, just thought you had a peacock there with you. For whatever reason, I saw the cat's tail as the head of a peacock. And I was like, she didn't tell me she got an emotional support peacock. That's the kind of thing you'd tell a friend. Okay. All right, everybody.
Well, I must say that my Mika was also going missing, because I have one that's usually on my desk here, and it's wandered away as well.
Oh, really? Well, maybe your cat took the peacock out of revenge for the cone. All right, thanks everybody for coming today. We'll see you in a month at the next one. Bye.